Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Peter Ward, author of The Price of Immortality, published by Melville House and released earlier this year. Immortality, living forever, something I've oftentimes pondered, as no doubt you have too. But what is it that we're actually pondering? The quest to enjoy a body that healthfully travels time's dusty corridors for 500, 1,000, forever years, avoiding the occasional piano or safe dropping from 40 stories? Or are we looking for an afterlife where our immortal soul resides, or periodically journeys back to Earth, where it reincarnates after searching the bardos? Or are we ready to upload ourselves to an AI device or to a cloud, perhaps a heavenly one whose energy derives from harnessing the power of the sun? In any event, whether we join a froth of multiverses from time to time immemorial, or simply hop around infinitely, there's something about this goal that centers, in my mind, on an awareness of my own existence, a consciousness that we are a me. And that's actually kind of where I get lost. So let's see whether Peter can help me get out of this forest without missing the trees. So welcome, Peter, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Sam. It's great to be on the show.
So here's a simple question. What is immortality?
Yeah, it sounds simple, but it's actually pretty difficult to define, to nail down a definitive explanation of what immortality is. So different people see it in different ways. There's biological immortality, where we live forever in the bodies that we're in right now, and that's probably the hardest one to obtain. There's sort of spiritual immortality, where we go on to some other plane, whether that be heaven or something else, which is commonly found in religions. And then, like you said, there's other forms of immortality, like digital immortality. There's this sort of immortality where you leave your works behind, where you leave your family and children behind, and you go on in that way. But I think if you take the sort of truest definition of the word immortality, it's actually, the more you think about it, it's completely impossible, because we don't know that the universe is immortal, for example. So, we could live for thousands of years. We could change our bodies so we could live for thousands or millions of years. But at some point, the Earth will most definitely be destroyed by the sun, or some other cataclysmic event. And there's no guarantee that the universe will survive that long either. So the more you go into it, the more you sort of tie yourself up in knots about what immortality is. So chasing it is really difficult, because often it can be a kind of moving goal.
Well, so I'm just taking down notes here. The thing I said in the introduction is like this consciousness, this idea that, not an idea, this construct, if you will, that I am me. I'm aware of my own existence as I am now, unless it's a solipsistic universe and you're just talking to no one, but which is also a possibility. You can't disprove it. But okay, so I go to sleep at night. If I'm not dreaming, well, when I'm dreaming, I have another self-awareness. But if I'm not dreaming, I'm essentially losing my immortality right there, in my mind, because I have no awareness of my own existence. That's kind of weird. I mean, it's true though, right?
Yeah, I mean, the more you think about it, the more your head sort of implodes, because a lot of people sort of define living as a sort of and living for a long time as one sort of constant stream of consciousness. So they say that, if you were to be put on ice and then brought back to life, then that wouldn't really be immortality, because it's not, you're not you, because there's been an interruption in your own consciousness. But like you said, if you think about it, when we go to sleep every night, we lose that stream of consciousness. So for sort of 8 hours, if we're lucky, we're not who we really are. We're not aware of anything around us. So it's really, really does mess with your mind if you think, am I a different person every time I wake up in the morning? And the more you try and disprove that, the more it gets kind of scary, because how can you disprove that? It's almost impossible.
It's funny. The other night, I was sleeping really soundly, and my wife came in and she thought I looked dead, motionless, and she finally shook me, and I was shook back. And I thought, hey, that wasn't so bad, you know? I was I wasn't even there, which must mean there's some kind of modicum of awareness at some point when you're sleeping, because I just felt like, oh, that feeling of nothingness wasn't actually that bad. If you fall asleep like my grandmother always wanted to and died in her sleep, it's kind of cool, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's what we can all sort of hope for, really, isn't it? Just fall asleep one day, you know, preferably after, a good 90, 100 years, and just don't wake up again. And it's, um, but it's really a difficult thing for us to think about in any sort of format. Death messes with the human mind. I think because we're so wired to survive, that I think our brains are constantly trying to trick us into thinking we're not going to die, or that there is a way to live for a little bit longer, or to live forever. Um, so it's really interesting. The more you think about it, the weirder it gets. But yeah, no, I've definitely been in the same position of you where I've been sleeping so soundly, people I thought I was dead. Yeah, one of the things that I always think about is, I don't know if you've ever had a sort of general anesthetic when you go into surgery, and you feel that sort of rushing of your consciousness, almost rushing out of your body. I don't know if everyone experiences it the same, but as you're sort of counted down, I always feel this kind of rushing coming out of my body, and and that's really scary to me, because I sort of feel, what if that is what death is? That kind of all of a sudden everything that you know, and you're sort of trying to grasp hold of any bit of consciousness that you have. So yeah, that's a slightly scarier version, but I think the falling asleep is a much better thought.
It's funny because no matter where you grab, we know we could talk for 12 hours. Wherever you grab this concept, it gets all thorny. Yeah, like you were saying with anesthesia, after a procedure, you wake up and you say, when are we going to start? And
Yeah,
so a lot of the immortality actually has to do with, if you will, this construct that we've created of time. Absent time, there's no need for immortality because it's already there.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I guess memory. So the one thing that people say is memory and experiences. So the things that have been etched into our brains are what makes us who we are. So that would be, I guess, that's another definition of continuous consciousness, is that you have the same memories and experiences. But that brings you to the question of, you could take those memories of someone and put them in a different construct, a different body, a different brain. This is real sci-fi stuff. Obviously, it's not possible right now. Would that still be the same person? Would it still be you if it had your memories? But then obviously every decision you make from then on, would that person change? Would that entity change into a different person? Because you've got the memories to start off with, but then you're creating a new life as you go. So yeah, I think memories are extremely important in experience. I think they do make you who you are. But yeah, nailing down that definition of consciousness is one I think that we'll still be talking about in sort of 100 years time, and it still be fascinating.
Yeah, but one of the things, actually, I was talking yesterday about the fact that I was interviewing you, and we were talking about memories. And I'm saying, if you did upload, like the TV show, if you
Yeah.
did upload, or limitless, there's so many cultural references you put in the book, which is great. Oh, and I should mention, the book is worth reading just for the end notes. The end notes are great, and there's a lot of work on your part. But we were talking about memories, and I was thinking, well, if you upload it, why does the AI really care about the fact that you and your brother were fishing by a stream 50 years ago and catching crawfish and remembering that you can't step in the same river twice and stuff like that? Your AI is just thinking, hey, I know this stuff now because this happened. Why do I need to have this sense of evocativeness? It doesn't really serve any purpose. And then that kind of dissipates the self-awareness aspect of it too.
Yeah, yeah. So if you go into sort of mind uploading thing, there's one character in the book, a Russian researcher who does look into this and tries to build this sort of roadmap to how digital immortality might happen. And it's almost, so he describes how we'd need enormous amounts of power. We need to harness the power of the sun, with something like a Dyson sphere to really get everything from the sun. But he also says we'd need this sort of all-powerful AI. And then almost as a sort of footnote, he says, oh, and by the way, the AI has to not turn evil, which is a fairly big sort of caveat to put at the end of this grand plan. Because like you said, if you've got some kind of reality that's built by an AI, then it can all of a sudden do anything that, you know, it wants to be as efficient as possible. Why does it need your vacation memory from 1998? What does that add to the experience? If it was, if it was not an AI, if it was just a program and it was told, you have to make the most realistic, then obviously it would hoover up all those memories and see that those are extremely important. But yeah, as soon as you get a true AI involved, then you get that big question of like, well, will it be, Terminator AI, or will it be, something more kind and sympathetic to human nature?
If you go back from AI backwards to the beginning of the book, which is, it's funny, and we have a lot of snake oil salesmen involved, and you have Darwin and Alcor and all that. This concept of cryogenics, which is discounted now, but was kind of seminal in the fact that it started the whole ball rolling. But talk a little bit about that, because that's a good portion of the beginning of the book, and it's fascinating. And as I said, it's character driven.
Yeah. So Cryonics is what got me started on this topic. And to be honest, I was tempted almost to write an entire book about it. You can probably see that when you read the book, that I really get into it. Because the more I dug into it, the more I was just fascinated by these characters. So cryonics is the basic concept is that you freeze your body, and then at some time in the future, scientists will find a way to reanimate you. So you'll have a second life, essentially. And it started further back than you'd imagine. It's the sort of late 1960s. So the first person was frozen. And it just has all these characters, because when it first started, it wasn't done by sort of, these pictures of scientists in white lab coats. That's not the people who were doing this. It was amateur enthusiasts that were just trying to get this done any way they could. Most of them sci-fi fans, most of them going more off sort of fiction rather than anything scientific. And so you had these crazy characters, which I just couldn't resist. Every time I've met a new character, I wanted to make them, build a whole chapter around them. And also the Cryonics community, aside from being, great characters, they're also really, really nice people. I mean, they're not sort of mad, evil geniuses. They are just sort of your everyday person that just happens to want to live a little bit longer. And so, yeah, I love writing about Cryonics. It was absolutely fascinating, and the journey they went on. And I was talking with someone the other day, actually, and thinking, as a sort of what if moment, and what if Cryonics hadn't had the start they had, because it was fairly chaotic at the start. As you said, there were snake oil salesmen, there were fraudsters, there were some really darkly comedic episodes. But what if it got off to a better start? It's not inconceivable that, Cryonics could be a sort of third way of laying someone to rest. We have burial, we have cremation. Like, why not freeze people as well, just on the off chance? So yeah, it's a fascinating thought experiment to see what if it just had gone a little bit better at the start. Maybe it would be more respected today. I still don't think we'll get to the point where we can reanimate people, but what really is the difference between freezing someone or burying them? There's not a huge amount, really. We bury people because it's a sort of it's a ritualistic thing, it's a ceremonial thing. There's no reason we couldn't build the same ceremony and ritual around freezing people. So scientifically, it's still not there, but yeah, it was an interesting thought, and got a lot of people involved for many decades, and it's still going today, obviously.
Yeah, it's kind of like Pascal's wager. It's like, you might as well believe in God, because if he does exist, you're going to heaven. If he doesn't, you really haven't lost anything.
Yeah.
So the thing is, though, at the beginning, you have these guys chopping off heads and sticking them in dry ice, maybe a couple hours after the person died. But if you go into like what could be done now, you could have a cryogenicist in the operating room or at the deathbed, and the very moment that the brain function ceased, you freeze them to whatever temperature you think is nice, absolute zero or 0 degrees Celsius or whatever, and then you keep them that way. The problem I've always had is, say Walt Disney did this in early 60s, and it's just his head. Hasn't there been a power failure? Didn't the generator fail? I mean,
Yeah.
there's just no assurance that someone's going to keep this switch on, especially given the world situation right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of things that can go wrong. Like you could have an earthquake, you could have climate change be a big problem if you're trying to freeze people and keep them frozen. There's so many, and the obviously the most worrying is the company could go bankrupt, and that's probably the most obvious thing that would happen. So you really are putting your sort of eternal life in the hands of these people. But again, they sort of say, well, I think a lot of the cryonicists and the people that sign up to this, they sort of acknowledge that, it might be less than a 1% chance that I'm ever going to come back. And yes, the company might go bankrupt, but they'd say, oh, what am I losing? It's the thing they always say is, I'd rather, it's better than being in the control group, essentially. I'd rather be in the experiment, just on the off chance that it works. So yeah, it's a really fascinating industry, but it's fraught with so many problems. You just can't say. I think it's less than a 0.0001% chance. I think it's tiny. You can never say that something could never happen, but you can get as close as you can with that, I think.
Wouldn't it be terrible if you were like in a clinical trial and you were terminal and you ended up being the placebo group? It sucks.
Yeah, yeah, it would be. I've always thought that. I was reading recently the what's it called, Emperor of All Maladies, and they sort of talk about some of the cancer research groups there and how they had to stop one because it was so beneficial that they had to stop giving people the placebo. But yeah, so it must be a real dilemma, and it must really play on the doctor's mind as well, thinking, this could be a miracle joke, but I can't give it to half the people here. Yeah, it's fascinating.
For some reason, that reminded me of what's a side note, but interesting, is the concept and the business of life insurance regarding this science or pseudoscience, depending how you look at it.
Yeah, so a lot of people pay for cryonics with an extra life insurance policy. So you take out the life insurance policy just like you would normally, and then instead of it paying out to your relatives when you die, it pays out to the cryonics company. So obviously it costs a lot of money to get yourself cryogenically frozen. It's up to sort of 50,000. So you could take out this life insurance policy. It can go up to sort of 200,000, and then all that money just goes to the cryonics company, and that theoretically pays for your upkeep. One thing as far as I can see, and maybe they've got an answer for this now, it doesn't really take into account something that's very topical right now, which is inflation. So if you've got sort of $200,000 laid down for your eternal upkeep, that $200,000 in 100 years' time could be worth, $20 at this rate if we keep going on the inflationary rate that we're going at. So yeah, that is also fraught with problems. It also causes huge friction within families because you've got this insurance policy which the relatives are never going to see anything from. And sometimes if that's not communicated properly before someone dies, that can be a real point of contention when they see, $100,000 or whatever going to this company instead of to relatives who probably would prefer it to go to them.
Yeah, I would be pissed off. Which reminds, did you read that silly review of your book in Forbes magazine?
I did, yeah. It was, the good thing about that review is that people have got in touch with me and said, I read the review and I instantly bought the book because the review is, and I always try and be sort of, you're going to have bad reviews and you have good reviews. And I always try and think, okay, well, I'm just going to take the criticism on board and that's great. But yeah, that review was, I don't want to say unhinged, but slightly unhinged.
It was unhinged. The thing about it was Forbes is, a capitalist tool as what it's designed to be. And what they were doing was essentially saying you were destroying this, and you use a really good pun about Trumpism in your book. But yeah, Peter Thiel, who I despise. I've always despised Peter Thiel. And especially when he hired the guy who wrote Hillbilly Elegy. That guy is Such,
Yeah.
but which is a horrible book too. But anyway, this apology, he in the article he says you're attacking billionaires, which is fine with me, but the Jeff Bezos, that the old robber barons, as robbers as they were, established these wonderful institutions that led you and the people you interviewed to where we are now with regard to the medical advances. But it was basically just a capitalist apology, right?
Yeah, no, it was really weird. So that when I first started reading it, I thought, oh no, this is a terrible review. And then as it went on, it's like, no, this guy is actually throwing himself in front of the billionaires and saying, well, won't somebody think of the billionaires? Which are the last people on earth that need defending, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm sure no one really cares. None of them care that I have written a book which they get slightly criticized in. And yeah, Peter Thiel, I'm definitely on the same page with you. I mean, my editor took out a lot of references to Peter Thiel, which were not published. I should probably send the original draft to the Forbes guy, because that would just, I think, trigger him even more, and he might write another review because that was even more scathing.
All that was left overtly in it was the Trump pun. That was the only that you left in. Well, so, as a bookseller, and actually all of my customers, they're interested in titles and covers. And if you say, don't judge a book by its cover, they totally ignore you. And they do judge a book by its cover. And it's a great cover. But then, the subtitle is not really a subtitle, it's part of the title, is the price of immortality. And I'm going, and someone's going to look at the cover and go, okay, what is the price? What are you paying other than this insurance? What are you paying for the possibility that you'll be able to extend your life 500, 1,000, as I said in the introduction, or indefinitely? What's the price?
Yeah, I think that was a key. And actually, I don't want to linger on the Forbes review, but I think that was one bit that he didn't understand, was that the book is called The Price of Immortality. It's not how to be immortal, which I still find a lot of people expect to see a sort of how-to guide when they open the book. But the price, it was called The Price because it was supposed to look into the consequences if we ever achieve this, which are multiple. And then as I went along, I realized there's actually quite a big price for even pursuing it in the first place. So there's a lot of sort of different areas that are affected, I think, by this. The first and most immediate is the people looking into longevity, sort of healthcare and things that will make us live healthier lives, but will die at the same time. So the people doing research into Alzheimer's, the people doing research into diseases that come when we get older. And they hate the immortality headlines that come from when they publish any research. They hate being hounded by these people who are desperate to find a way to live forever. So they're always emailing them and asking them, about their research and believing that every little thing that they discover in a fly or a mouse or something could be the secret to them living longer personally. So I do think it has a detrimental effect on that research. So I think that's one of the prices to start off with. Secondly, just on an individual level, I think seeing what some of the people chasing immortality do every day, does that, so they're going after this goal of immortality, but at what cost to their actual life? So if you're sitting there saying, okay, I'm not going to eat X, Y, and Z, I'm going to do this every day, I'm going to take 100 supplements, I'm not going to go out in the sun because I might get cancer, I'm not going to fly, I'm not going to have a phone, or there's so many different things that you could do to make yourself live a little bit longer. At some point, you just you're not living. So you're trying to live longer, but you've already stopped living because you're so obsessed with this idea of living forever that you're doing all these crazy things. You're going off to do stem cell treatments in other countries and stuff like that. So I think that's another price. And then finally, it's sort of, if we did actually achieve anything like this, then what's the price then? And then that goes on to things that inequality that we have right now would be multiplied. Probably we would have a sort of two-tiered society where some people would live forever, and I'm sure other people wouldn't have that option because they just wouldn't be wealthy enough to get the cure for death. So there's a lot of things going down the line, and people get really enraged when you talk about those, the immortality seekers, because they just believe once we've we've cured death, then everything else will just fall into place. That will be utopia at that point. They can't see a future where actually this could be, this could actually be terrible. You'd have all these 200-year-old people. I mean, I'm in the UK right now, and if I cannot imagine the generation who voted for Brexit living for another 50, 100 years, like what that would do to the political landscape here. It's frightening. The society is supposed to refresh itself in that way. It's brutal, but it's probably healthy. The young people in my country give me so much more hope than the sort of 80-year-olds who voted to leave the European Union. So I think, there are huge costs that we don't see. There's huge costs that we can see coming, but the people that are chasing immortality seem to just have these blinkers on. They won't even accept any of them.
Yeah, it's like you talk about the first guys who talked about eugenics, some of these people we should let live. And then, there's some sense in the idea some don't really need to live because they're not going to contribute anything. But then you get into all kinds of moral dilemmas. But the other thing you were talking about is the cost, the bifurcation by class, the idea of getting young blood transfusions, or that guy who takes 150 supplements per day and has someone sort them out for him. But the other thing is, I'll leave this last thing about the review. If we talk about healthcare, he says that the most expensive thing in healthcare is linens. Remember when he said that?
Yeah.
That's
utterly bizarre. Yeah. Utterly bizarre. Yeah. And I think he tried to make the point that, American healthcare is the best in the world. And, I lived in America for 9 years, and I mean, it's not that. So no, I really should have asked to sort of, blurb that review. I think it actually does much more good for the book than the reviewer intended.
I do think actually, if I was selling the book, I would say, read this review, and then they would buy the book. I would. Okay, what the hell is this guy talking about? But then you'd realize he was wrong. You were right. One of the things that always fascinates me, and you talk about it in the very beginning, Orpheus and Eurydice, and why does everyone always look back? Whether it's like Lot's wife at Sodom and Gomorrah, or Medusa, why? And that's a part of this. I can't explain exactly why it's a part, but you bring it up. So why does everyone always look back when they're told specifically, don't look back?
Yeah, it's a warning, isn't it? It's something that is obviously ingrained in our psyche somehow as humans, as a species, that we're sort of, when you're looking back, you are sort of trying to grab hold of life that's gone. So it is a sort of trying to escape from death in a way. And then if you look back, to sort of heroes gone by, they always pick death over living. So it's not just sort of not looking back; it's also not clinging on to something. It's saying that, okay, death is just the next step, and I'm willing to accept that. So even if you think of the story of Achilles, he's faced with a choice before he goes off to Troy. Where, you can go to Troy, and you will die, or you can stay here, have a great life, and you'll have X, Y, and Z. But he chooses obviously to go to Troy and to fight, knowing full well that he's going to die, and then he gains his immortality through that action because he chooses death. So that again is sort of don't cling on. Things move forward, things change. Don't try and move back, and it's very applicable to death, because obviously when we lose someone, we spend a huge amount of time looking back, and that's really natural. But eventually, and it doesn't mean that we have to forget people, doesn't mean that we have to let them go completely, but our lives do have to move on. And spending your whole life thinking how I could have stopped them dying, or how I can stop myself dying, is not a healthy way to deal with that, I don't think. I'm not a psychiatrist or anything. But yeah, it's fascinating that we get all these warnings throughout literature. It's like, every single story, every single culture, I think, has a story where someone either looks back, or they try and be immortal, or they try and cling on to life too much. And it's always a cautionary tale. yet we're still making the same mistake. We're still chasing that thing that we're not really supposed to chase. And obviously, one of the greatest examples is the story of, obviously, of Socrates, who people say he masters discipline by accepting death. That's the ultimate mastery of philosophy, was accepting that he was going to die and not letting his friends help him escape death. So yeah, really interesting, and it makes you think that there's something in our minds that are telling us that yes, this is something that we naturally go after, but maybe it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, there's two thought experiments I always think about. One of them is, you see a little girl on the train tracks and a train's coming. Would you jump onto the tracks, push her out of the way, knowing certainly you're going to die? And the other one is Chungyam Trungpa from Shambhala Publications, the Rinpoche. He says if you jump out of a plane with a parachute, take the scissors and cut the cords. He says all you ever have to really do is let go, and he calls it this little thingy. And it's just let go. If you're afraid of stepping over a curb all your life, you're not going to step over the curb, because it's the hardest thing to do, but it's also the very easiest thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that thing, isn't it? I mean, I referenced in the book Ernest Becker's Denial of Death, which I think is a really interesting. It's a fantastic book, and it raises some really interesting points. And one of them is just that the death is just constantly on our minds, and rather than sort of pat it down and forget about it, put it back of mind and suppress it, we should actually confront it and then move on from it, and live our lives without that fear of death. But yeah, I mean, a lot of us, I think, spend more time than we would imagine and we'd expect actually avoiding the thought of death. But it's always there, and like you said, like crossing the road or something, every little decision we make, in some way there's a calculation. There's part of the calculation is, but what if it kills me, or what if I die? So yeah, jumping out of a plane and cutting the cord, yeah, you would have, you'd die at the bottom, but there's one way to, stretch that over 90 years. We've all jumped out of the plane, and maybe cutting the cord and hitting the ground is would give you the best possible ride along the way down. So yeah, it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, it's certainly freedom. And it's funny because you're in the book, you're not saying it, but you're talking about how everybody wants this. And I think, no, not everybody wants it or actually deserves it. I mean, that one 80-year-old militant woman who you describe perfectly, her clothing and everything, who gets up and is all gung-ho. But here am I, almost in the middle, or no, towards the end of the baby boomers. And you talk about that. I'm 70 years old. I mean, who the hell needs me? They need you. They don't need me. What the hell could I possibly contribute at this point other than talking to you? I mean,
yeah, I mean, that's a very brutal way of putting it. Obviously, you are contributing a lot of things, but if you look at it just in a very, evolutionary sense, like, why do we die? And people, there's not a definitive answer to why we do die, but one of the thoughts is that once we reach a certain age in the community, once we get beyond the point where we are an effective grandparent, this is assuming that everyone has children. This is, going back to evolutionary thinking, that everyone wants to have children, everyone has grandchildren. But once you essentially are no more use to the community, the tribe, or whatever, then you should just go off into the wilderness and die. And so, yeah, it is. If you think about it, it is extremely necessary to die. Saying all this, the people that chase immortality actually call that type of thinking, the cult of death. They're so against it, and other groups actually say that every death is a suicide. That's how militant they can get. So yeah, I think we're on the polar opposite of them, that we say actually it's just a normal thing. It's scary, but yes, it's going to happen. We can't let it dictate our lives. And yeah, I mean, I think most people, if you were, if we're in a post-apocalyptic time, resources were scarce, and you said, there's only enough food to feed you or this 15-year-old, for example, or 10-year-old, or a baby, you'd say, no, well, the baby should have the food. You know, I'm older, I'm done. So they're the future.
Well, now I made myself feel bad, and you've helped me. Well, and there's a part where you say, okay, I don't need to get into the specifics. How many different ones? There's 9, right? There's 9 different reasons why you feel like there's reasons why the body becomes, for want of a better word, senescent and then dies. But
Yeah.
like these people grasp onto like the caps of the telomeres, it's like, this is what's going to do it. And they're so sure of it. And the scientists are sure of it to a certain extent. If we can just extend the telomere and make sure the cap stays on. It's like,
Yeah.
why are they so certain? It's religious.
Yeah, it's strange. And what's really strange is you get these sort of different groups latching on to a different sort of
Right.
hallmark of aging, or a different particular drug or a molecule which they think is going to fix one thing. One thing is for definite: if we ever do find a cure for aging, or make somebody immortal, it will be an immensely complex thing. It won't be one drug which has always been around. It's going to be, our bodies are built to die. So you're going to have to shut off so many processes, so many things written into our genes that program us to die. It's never going to be one thing, but it is strange the way people get almost tribal about their, there's someone that follows me on Twitter, and they always talk about rapamycin,
Right.
as if that's the only thing. And every time, to the point where I write something, and if I don't mention rapamycin, then I'm somehow completely wrong, and they get quite quite offended by the fact that rapamycin is not in the article that I was writing at that point. And it is covered in the book, but it's one of many things that might help, and has only been known to very slightly help animals in tests that have no relation to humans and could never be applied to humans possibly. So it's bizarre that people pick one and then go with it.
There's 2 movies that you talk about. The one is Benjamin Button, which was a great movie. I loved it, and a great short story, really. But you talk about the one, is it a mollusk that lives backwards and gets more and more youthful?
The jellyfish, yeah. That's really interesting. The immortal jellyfish, which apparently has no other purpose. It's unspectacular in every single way, except if someone attacks it, it goes back to its it basically de-ages itself and restarts its life. So technically it could be immortal. It could keep doing that forever. That's fascinating. But one of the geneticists told me it's so far off a human, there's not much we can actually learn from it, to be honest.
But then there is the tortoise, the turtle, and the tortoise under the aegis of the turtle. I like that because the reason why he lives so long is because he just chills, and he doesn't get in the way of trouble, and he just slows everything down and can live without oxygen. Those are like examples of how we actually could do better. Just slow down, take it easy, exercise, say, and have a better diet. Don't stress.
Yeah, exactly. I think turtles and tortoises are their program not to react to stress in the same way as us, and stress massively affects us. Definitely having a stress-free life would be one way to extend your life. But if someone, figures out a way to have a stress-free life, I think they'll be a billionaire the next day. Because I'm sure even, the wealthiest, most fortunate and privileged people in the world still have extremely stressful days. It's just unavoidable. But I think that's one of the things that, people always ask me, so how do I live forever? How do I live a bit longer? And I always sort of say, well, the answer is actually really boring. You eat healthily, you exercise, and you try and avoid the things that puts your body into stress. So it's not, it's not rocket science. Maybe in the future there will be some kind of rocket science which emerges, which makes you cut those corners. But it's just like it's the things your doctor tells you to do anyway. Just do those, and you'll give yourself the best chance of living a longer life.
Yeah, and to go back to capitalism, it's like when I used to practice law and I did personal injury cases, some guy might lose an arm in a jet ski accident or something, and then I get him $600,000 and he's all excited, and I go, wouldn't you rather have your arm back?
Yeah.
It's not like winning the lottery. But then also, when I have kids working for me at the bookstore, I do an experiment too. I'll say to them, would you give up a year of your life for $1 million? And they go, sure. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's just a different, I wouldn't. And then one of your billionaires, Peter Thiel, if he got sick and was miserable being sick, would he give up all his money? Yes, he would
Yeah.
immediately, just as you and I would.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a weird sort of, it's a weird clash in our heads. Like it's, what's the saying that, every rich person, every young person wants to be rich and every rich person wants to be young. So it's that sort of paradox that, as soon as you get one, you want the other. So
Yeah, which reminds me of a story about Jean Calment, who lived to be, well, and I honestly think it was her, not her daughter, that lived to be the oldest person in the world. But the side story is in France, apparently you can pay the rent on a house for somebody, and then when you die, you get the house. So this guy paid the rent for Jean, and he was like 25, and he ended up dying when he was 75. He just paid her rent for 50 years and never got the house.
I didn't know that. So he was just stuck waiting
Yeah.
for Jean to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's terrible. My favorite part of that story is the sort of rebuttal from the French villagers, the people who knew her, that when she was accused of being a fraud, and that her daughter had taken her place, they said, no, Jean was so unpleasant and everyone despised her so much that they wouldn't have ever kept her secret on her behalf, which I think is just a fantastic defense.
She was funny too, the way she said she was waiting for death in journalists.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. She sounds like a great character, and also a reminder that so much is in our genes and out of our control, because she didn't live a particularly healthy lifestyle, and
She was
still lived.
smoking. She was smoking when she was over 100 years old, right?
Yeah, she was still smoking. I think she enjoyed a drink, and she didn't, she ate what she wanted, and yet she still lived on. So clearly, her genes, her genetic makeup was just really resistant to the diseases that usually kill us at that age. So it's a lot of it's out of our hands. It's already written in our genes.
And then the other thing I thought about was, you're talking about life and simply the continuation of life. And then you talked about the jellyfish, you talked about the turtle, but then you don't mention, which maybe is correct, like sequoias that have been around for before Jesus was born. They're essentially immortal, but no one ever thinks about them. Oh, they're immortal, but they don't really think. Although I do, I think they think. But that's the other thing. You emanate your essence, and I think trees do that. And in a sense, I think that's self-awareness. But yeah, what about that? I mean, those guys are fine. They can just hang on.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And I'm, I think it got to the point the book could have been like 4 volumes long if I'd have really. It got to the point where I had to define some parameters for immortality and who was chasing it. But yeah, it's definitely worth sort of mentioning that. And one of the things, that we always forget as people, when we talk about the end of the world or anything and the apocalypse, like, no, the world's not going to end. Humanity will end, but the world will actually be fine. We might be wiped out, but the trees will still be there. The oceans will still be there long after we've gone. And yeah, it is a really interesting question to see just, consciousness in terms of trees. And, is there any sort of, is there anything there? There's obviously not been, I think it's one of those things that's not researched because it's just considered too sort of outlandish. But yeah, there's certainly, it's something that I'm completely open to. And I think the more we think of nature and earth as a living thing and a conscious thing, the actual more empathy we might have for the planet that we live on, and that could actually do us a lot of good in the years to come when we have this huge battle with climate change.
Yeah, you're right. The earth would be probably happy if we were gone. It would do a lot better for itself, and the cockroaches would be hanging on by themselves.
Yeah.
But the one thing you do, and this is not well, maybe it is your opinion, but one thing you impress upon me at the beginning of the book, and kind of it's woven throughout, is that there's this concept that everyone wants to be immortal. I don't think that's true at all.
Yeah, I think that's talking. So I think it's not that everyone wants to be immortal all the time. It's just when we reach a certain point, we all want a little bit more. So, and not just for us, for other people. So I thought about this really deeply before I started writing, like whether I would want to be immortal. And so first off, my first reaction is no, absolutely not. And then you sort of ask yourself, well, what if I was sort of 95 years old and I still had something that I felt I wanted to do? Would I accept like another year or another 5 years, another 10 years? And when we saw that end coming, would you change your mind? I think for some people that would change their mind. For others, it wouldn't at all. They'd be happy just to die. And then I thought about, would I stop my loved ones dying if I could? Which is a completely selfish thing. And again, it goes back to not looking back, to moving on. But if I was given the power to make someone close to me and dear to me immortal, or if they were dying and I could stop them dying, would I invoke that power? Would I use it? And I think I don't know if I would ever be at a point where I'd be strong enough to say no, because it would be such a huge thing to do. So even though I don't, and also built into us is this sort of concrete thing that we have to survive. That's built into our psyche and humanity. So I truly believe that it's the most enlightened person that can actually say no and maintain that no under all those sort of different circumstances. And I really don't think you could know what you're going to say unless you were actually in that moment. So I don't think that everybody does want immortality outwardly, but I think under certain circumstances, it definitely becomes more appealing and harder to turn down, which is why it's always, that goal at the end of why we always chase the elixir of life and all these stories. Those are just sort of echoes of that feeling that we all have that, if you were, Indiana Jones and given the Holy Grail, it's a bad example because it's, it's Pulp Fiction basically, but a B movie. But that whether he should grasp the Holy Grail cup or and it might throw him down the hole. We're all tempted, and obviously Indiana Jones says, "No, I just want to live, and I'm going to let it go." But yeah, in that there's something in us there that we'd all be extremely tempted by it. And so it's just a fascinating question. I don't think you'd ever get an actual answer, but there's something in us that has to fight against that. I think it's a sort of default that we want to live a bit longer.
Yeah, that's true. The best part of that scene was the fact that he picked the simplest grail, the one that a poor man might have, rather than, and that goes to this idea of wanting more. I mean, yeah, going back to billionaires, you look at Jeff Bezos, or you or me. I mean, I don't want a Lamborghini. Why would I want a Lamborghini? So I could park at caddy corner at the end of a parking lot so no one scratches it, and I would cry if it got. I don't want that. It makes no sense to me. But Jeff Bezos builds a yacht that's so big that he can't get it under the bridge, so he can't even get it into the ocean. But why? What is it that he wants? And that's kind of what you're saying about life. You just want more.
Yeah.
And maybe, I mean, our prime directive is to survive. I mean, that's why we're here. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here in the first place. So,
yeah.
And then the other thing, for me to continue talking and not you,
it's okay,
is that my mother died three years ago. She still exists as far as I'm concerned. I know what she would say when I talk to her. I know what she thought. I remember laughing with her and singing with her. The only thing missing is she's not aware of it. And all we have is this 5 pounds of wetware. All right, this is the last thing and I'll let you talk. So I was in Paris 2 weeks ago and I went to the catacombs and there's these million skulls and I'm looking at them and every single one of them was born, had a mother, played, worked, was either killed, died of old age, cancer, whatever, but they had all of this. Where is it? It's just these little boxes. And it's
it's fascinating.
I didn't ask a question.
Yeah. No, but it's so interesting. It's like I feel like there's some kind of balance really between people that are very sort of and that's sort of what the book concludes, really. There's a balance in everything. Don't do anything too outlandish in terms of your pursuit of it. Just be healthy, don't be immortal, and don't chase it at other people's expense. And I think in this respect, there is a balance of like, no, you shouldn't have to just move on and forget people existed after they die. It's not, you can sort of keep them alive in what you do and what they taught you and everything. And then, but also don't linger so much that you forget to live yourself. I think the one thing to remember is that death for the person who died is they're the ones that get it the easiest. They don't have to mourn what they've lost. It's the people that are left behind that have the real pain. They're in a way sort of the lucky ones that if they're in pain, they're no longer suffering. They don't have to worry about anything else, and not want to go too much into what happens afterwards. Even if there's nothing afterwards, which is sort of, I think, what I land on. It's still, well, that's nothing. So there's no pain, there's no suffering, there's no existence, but also they're released of any sort of worldly issues. And so in a way, death is always harder for the people that are left behind. And so how we deal with it is really important. But we certainly shouldn't, if we shouldn't sort of linger on it too much when someone does pass, I think, as if this terrible thing has happened. Like when the immortalists see people die, they see it as this great waste and this terrible waste of life, because they think, you've gone out at 80 when you could have gone out at 3,000. But I think there's definitely, a balance. We want to keep people happy and living. And the one thing that I always came back to is that suffering is a lot worse than death. And if someone told me you could eliminate death or eliminate suffering in the world, then I'd choose suffering every single time. Because some people live an entire life of suffering. And so, yeah, it's hard. I think the easiest way to think about it is just to, like anything else, have empathy. And I think a lot of the immortalists, the one trait that I really didn't like about them was a lot of them were very single-minded. It was about them personally living forever. And they said, oh, well, when we live forever, we'll fix the world afterwards. And that's nonsense. Fix the world first, and then maybe think about living forever.
Yeah, it's a fascinating mindset. What I was thinking of when you were talking about that was in Harry Potter, when he's facing Voldemort, and there's his mother and father behind him in Sirius Black, and that kid he tried to save from the maze, and they're there to help him, but they're not really there, but they are there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we have that every day. Our parents and grandparents, we have their genes. Biologically, we have their genes, and then we have their lessons and everything that they passed on that way as well. So we're constant reminders of people that have left us, and it's all around us, which is another thing, which is why I definitely wouldn't do cryogenics, because you would wake up in a world where you didn't have a connection to anybody, and actually coming back from the dead would probably be one of the most terrifying experiences that you could imagine, because I said it's, death is easiest for the people that died, but if they then came back to life 200 years later, that would be awful. I think you'd be a sort of refugee from your own time, and it just wouldn't be enjoyable.
And the reason why, to conclude, is one of the reasons why I like the book so much is when you talk like that, it reminds me of so many science fiction books that I read when I was little. And you're right, It would be terrifying. You wake up in this white room with these people looking over you, and there's no context.
Yeah. And you might not even have a body either. It's just your just your head. And also and that was another thing. You might lose something if we say that memories are the things that make us who we are. Then a lot of our memories are intrinsically linked with what's around us. People that trigger memories, or there's places that trigger memories. And in this new world, 200 years in the future, without those things, those memories would never be triggered. They just lie dormant somewhere in our brains. So would we even be the same person? That's an interesting question as well.
Yeah, that's the fascinating thing about this book is that, and that's, as a bookseller, again, that's what I look for, whether this book is in our book club or something like that. everybody's going to have a different opinion, because everyone in your book has a different opinion and a different mindset. And that's what carries readers forward, is the fact that when they're done and they close the book, they're not done. They're not done with the book. And that's why the end notes are so great, because they can delve as deep as they want into this whole subject, right? The end notes are amazing. That was a lot of work.
Yeah, no, I mean, I came into it with not a background in sort of biology or science things, so there was a lot of learning I had to do, and I didn't want to make the book too scientific. I wanted it to be sort of for the lay person, essentially, but I still had to sort of master it before I could get into it. So I did. It's built off the back of a lot of people's excellent work, and so I just want to make sure everyone knew that and everyone got their due.
Yeah. Okay. To end, I'm going to end going back to the jackass reviewer. You did all this work. He wrote that review without doing any work at all, right?
Yeah.
It's just what he thought of you, because he's basically got a sign in his front yard that says Trump 2024.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. And he's, it got, the book was reviewed well everywhere else. So I can't really complain that this was the one that, and if you're going to get a bad review, you may as well have one like this, which is just laughable. So
yeah, it's funny. It's like if you're looking up restaurants on Yelp and you got 500 5 stars and one guy that gives it 1 star, it's a really good restaurant.
Yeah, especially if that review says, I couldn't go in there because I was wearing my MAGA hat, and
okay. Or the napkin fell on the floor and the waiter didn't come and pick it up.
Yeah, you head straight into that restaurant, definitely.
All right, well, this is where I go off. This is why my interviews go so long. It's not because of you, it's because of me. But thanks so much, Peter. This was great. The book was great. Since it was released in April. You're right, April?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So
April,
it's been sitting on our front table, and my daughter sells it. She comes out from behind the counter and grabs it, and so
awesome. That's great to hear.
Yeah, really is. Okay, thanks again. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. It's great being on.
Okay, talk to you later.
Thanks.